Hi, good afternoon. This is Leo, one of the interpreters, and the other interpreter, the Spanish interpreter is gonna be Gabby. Whoever is in charge, could you guys assign us as interpreters, please? Thank you so much.
Everyone, thanks for coming out tonight. Folks on the Zoom here. Yeah, let's do this real quick. Here are our friends on Zoom, so everyone can see. Yeah.
Wait, the camera's over here.
Oh.
Yeah, so thanks for coming out tonight.
Oh, thanks.
That's the
I
camera.
like, okay.
My name is Seven. I use they, them pronouns. I'm one of the co-organizers of the Chicago Housing Justice League Coalition. This is Annie, my co-organizer. Welcome to our evening meeting. We've been doing these monthly evening meetings for about a month now, for a couple of months now. This is great. This is by far our most well-attended one thus far. So tonight we're going to be talking about the migrant housing issues that have been going on in the city recently. I am going to start off by just talking about something that we try to practice here when we host our meetings, which is called the feminist process. Can you do better?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're just gonna go over the feminist process real quick.
Is screen sharing also?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I'll share.
Yeah, thank you, Seven. So this is Feminist Process is a tool that is used.
Yeah.
Feminist Process is a tool that is used for making sure that we have good meetings. This is something that has been really helpful for us to make sure that we're being respectful and thoughtful as we talk about these complicated issues. A very quick rundown of them all. Respect the facilitators, that being Seven and I, others that are helping out and doing the panel tonight. Later on in the meeting, we'll have time for audience Q&A, both with people online and in person. And so, especially because this is a really complicated topic, a very human topic, also with a lot of misinformation going around, we really want to make sure that we're being respectful. And for the facilitators in particular, if we say we need you to wrap up, please, finish your comment. That'll be very important. We're going to keep comments and questions to about 90 seconds each, just to make sure we get through everything. 2, identify goals and objectives for the meeting. We don't have anything written out for the timeline for this meeting, but basically we're going to start the conversation with a little bit of overview with some slides that were presented in City Council to talk about kind of the scope of the situation. We're then going to have a brief conversation with David Zolden, the legislative coordinator for the campaign, who's going to talk about some of the policy recommendations that we have, which you should have on your seat in front of you. There's also some over here, and they're also available in Spanish if you would like that. Before I go any further, I just want to make sure to, for the folks especially online, we do have this meeting being live interpreted. I just want to name that explicitly. So if you are joining us online, there is the interpretation channel. And then if you want to do live interpretation in the room, we have folks back there that can help you with that. So just want to make sure if anyone is in person and would like interpretation. Okay. Number 3, share the air. We want to really be mindful of how much time we're taking up and how much we're kind of part of the conversation. Mostly for folks that are in the crowd, that'll just be being mindful of the 90-second limit for questions. Number 4, make I statements. There's been, as I said, a lot of misinformation floating around about the situation. It's tricky, right? I don't want you to say, I heard, and then maybe say something that's really wrong, but try to keep it personal as far as anything that you're feeling, and trying to not say, objectively, this is a problem that we're having in the city, because that is one person's perspective on this very complicated topic. Number 5, address behavior, not individuals. If you feel like there's something that's happening that is not to your liking that you want to address, It's not about the person necessarily as a human being, as a whole person, but as the behavior that they're doing right now. So be mindful of that. Number 6, with that, do not be afraid to apologize or ask for an apology. It is very easy in the moment to get caught up in things, and I love apologizing because it feels very good. So don't be afraid to do that. Number 7, do not assign motives. Just making sure that we don't believe certain things about our fellow panelists, our fellow people in the room, just because of anything you might assume about them. That's very important. And then finally, number 8, this is mindfulness of jargon. So if there is anything that is said tonight that you're like, what is that term? That sounds very specific. That is something that we can flag. Folks on Zoom, if you ever are like, what did that mean? Just chime up there. Another thing that I've seen in other meetings is the jargon giraffe. So if you're ever just like, what does that term mean? You can just throw this up and we'll try to figure out what is the confusion. Okay, so that is kind of this process.
Thank you, Annie. Okay, so I'm just gonna read off some quick statistics really quick that all come from the city's website, as well as this. Oops. Yeah, this slide deck that was presented to the city council pretty recently. So as of January 30th, most of the asylum seekers here in Chicago are from Venezuela, but there are also individuals and families from all over the world, including from the Caribbean, from Africa, from Europe and the Middle East. Approximately 35,000 plus people have arrived in the last year and a half, since August 2022. The state of Texas has sent over 600 buses to Illinois in that period. 12,000 of the 35,000 have been resettled, 3,000 have been reunited with their families, and there are still approximately 14,000 currently in 28 shelters around the city, including 5,000 minors. And the most recent news from the mayor's office, which some of you may have heard, was that on January 29th, earlier this week, the mayor extended the 60-day stay in shelters. So they were originally people that were people that were originally scheduled to exit the shelters between the middle of January and the end of February are being extended another 60 days. So this has already happened a couple of times. So now we are going to have David read some of our quick policy recommendation platform.
Thank you all. Really appreciate that you are all here, either online or in person. This is a deeply important issue, obviously, for everybody in our city, especially those who are coming in now and our new neighbors. We address this problem from the standpoint that everybody has a human right to housing, that we all must be doing everything we can to ensure that people are safe and have good, decent, healthy, accessible homes that they can make and to be part of our communities here in Chicago. And in fact, as I was speaking with some of my colleagues, the word opportunity was used, in fact. And I think that's right. We have an opportunity to welcome these new neighbors into our neighborhoods, into our lives, into the fabric of our society. And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Of course, we do all this on the backs of decades upon decades of neglect of housing as a human right, of systems that were meant to fail us. And we need to address all those issues, and they're coming to a head as we sit here tonight and we're talking about this. And in fact, it's created a lot of tension throughout our city, not just for those migrants, but for communities that have been long neglected and deserve to have better treatment. All this with a new administration who's still getting their feet under them, and that while we hope are going to be successful, we must never, ever stop pushing to make sure that they are doing right. As Annie mentioned earlier, you have a list of our policy recommendations with you. on your chairs or on the chair next to you. If you need a Spanish language translation, or you somehow lost your copy, they are here on this table here. Links should have been sent to Zoom. I'm going to go through them very quickly, as I did make a promise I wouldn't read them out verbatim, for your sanity and mine. Obviously, first and foremost, we must pass just cause. Just cause is as much important to keeping these people in the housing that they get as it is for current residents. We must lift the ban on rent control to make sure that people aren't priced out of their neighborhoods, including new migrants. We must end all non-local contracts and move to systems that are locally based, that are run by POC, that are trauma informed. We must support migrant autonomy. We must make sure that they are given agency in all the work and all the efforts that they are doing to achieve autonomy here in the city. We must improve the shelter conditions. The material conditions are deplorable, and we must do everything we can to make sure that they are living in decent conditions as we are moving into more permanent solutions. We have to create more proactive plans for the future. We have to ensure that we don't just extend the policy another 60 days for them to get into housing, but that we are actually making sure that no one, I repeat, no one becomes homeless as a result of any of the policies that we are enacting now. We must make sure that we are keeping the homes that they get safe and secure and healthy. That includes passing the Healthy Homes Ordinance that is on the docket for this year, as well as making sure that none of the current landlords that are out there that we know are mistreating their tenants and that are on the current city scofflaw list are not actually being used to house migrants as we put them into permanent housing. And finally, to address some of the systemic issues, including some of the issues where we have seen a failure on an alternative to the current market that relies on landlords who may or may not be doing right by their tenants, we must have an alternative. And that includes holding CHA accountable, making sure that they are supplying an alternative to the public, to the private market, that public housing is made safe and secure, and that we are seeing better systems as we move throughout. Thank you so much. I look forward. This is obviously the start of a conversation, not the end of it. And most importantly, I urge you, if you see things on this list that you wish to work towards, you join the effort to do so. Saying we need these things is one thing. It is only through our action that we get them done. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll have to introduce our wonderful speaker panel.
Yeah, thank you everybody who's just coming in. If you're just joining us, we have masks up here, food on the side as well. If anyone would like to eat, please help us get through all of the food that we have. Yeah, so I am so lucky to be moderating this incredible panel with all of our speakers here tonight. I think if it's okay, do we want to do masks off, just especially for those online? It might be easier for the panelists specifically, not for anybody else. So yeah, I want to go down the line and introduce everybody that is here sitting with me. Immediately to my right is Kathleen Murphy. Toms is a member of Toto Para Todos, a mutual aid collective that's reimagining what it looks like to live in a world without borders. She is an adjunct instructor at NYU Center for Global Affairs and proud member of their new union. She's a lifelong Southsider, anti-racist, abolitionist who is constantly learning. She is humbled to be here with all of you today. To Kathleen's right is Pooja, they, them pronouns, works for the city of Chicago in the hopes of guiding government to create policy and fund programs so that everybody has an equal chance of of thriving in their communities. They currently serve as the Chief of Staff for Chairperson Andre Vasquez's Committee on Immigration and Refugee Rights. Also, I know we talked about it earlier, but the Palestine vote today, incredible. I know you had some candidates.
Free Palestine all day.
Next to Pooja, we have Katrina Pham, is a reporter with Borderless Magazine, a news outlet covering immigrant and refugee news in the city. She's worked on stories related to the Chicago's migrant housing crisis, including investigations on the city's shelters and deep dives into the barriers migrants face while looking for housing outside of shelters. That is part of why we have you here, because your reporting on the shelter in Pilsen was incredible, amongst many other stories, but that was a really important one, so thank you. And then finally, at the very end of the table is Antonio Gutierrez, pronouns they, them. Antonio is an undocumented queer anti-displacement organizer that co-founded both the Autonomous Tenants Union and organized communities against deportation. Antonio has been fighting for housing and immigration justice in Chicago since 2012 and has lived in the city of Chicago for over 23 years. Antonio is also one of my favorite organizers in the city, I'll just say that. Okay, so that is introductions for everybody on the panel. I want to do we have a microphone for the audience? So we're going to have about 45 minutes of conversation between the five of us, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments from the audience as well as folks online. So especially for folks online, if you've got questions that you want to ask for the panel, feel free to put them in the chat and we can ask them, or you can get off mute and do that later. But yeah, I think we really want to start with a question around, we have, again, tens of thousands of migrants showing up in Chicago, and we know that they're getting a lot of misinformation being told to them that is bringing them here. If there's anyone here who can answer, what are you hearing that migrants themselves are hearing as they're showing up in Chicago? What are they expecting? What consequences are there of people being told certain things that they're showing up here for expecting and they're not actually seeing those things? I don't know if anyone in particular.
I can try answering. Hello. Based on my conversations. Hello? Oh. Hello. So based on some of the conversations that I've had with a lot of the recently arrived migrants, I think one of the difficulties about understanding what it's the reality of living in the United States is because of social media and because of the spread of information on social media that when you come to the United States, you can find a job and you can start working, but the reality is there's a lot of barriers within the government that makes it really difficult for people to access the things that they need in order to work. Like, for example, in immigration status, like TPS, which is temporary protected status, or asylum status, or other statuses like that, which would grant them protection from deportation and grant them a pathway to getting a work permit, which is essential for what a lot of folks want to do when they come here, which is to work, to provide for their family, to maybe send money back home. So I think one of the misconceptions is that when you come here, you can get asylum, you can get TPS, you can get those protections, you can start working. But the reality is that it takes months, even years, for some people to be able to get those statuses from the government, and because of all of the backlogs. And especially when Biden expanded the TPS program for Venezuelans to July 31st, that means that everyone who arrived in the US from, I believe it's July 31st prior, is Venezuelan, qualifies for TPS, but everyone who comes after does not. And I don't think that a lot of people know that and understand that, and a lot of Venezuelans are still coming to the United States thinking that they can get TPS status, but they don't qualify. And so when they get here, they're kind of left empty-handed. They don't have any other options to apply.
Also, it's not free. It's not free to get TPS status. I hadn't realized this, maybe y'all did. It's $500 per person. It is $50 for kids to get a work permit, even though it is illegal for children to be working. That's the face I made. It's unattainable, right? And then if you are hiring a lawyer to help you with your asylum case, which you might think about doing because it's really difficult, that can be thousands of dollars. The application is very, very specific and particular. You can't write on your asylum application that you were just coming here to have a better life. You were coming here to, because of the economy. That's not sufficient enough in the government's eyes. So they have to write really extensive, and it's deeply traumatizing for them to go through this process too, right? Reliving the violence and trauma that they've been through in their countries and having to relay the amount of detail the federal government wants in order to grant that person asylum. It's really unbelievable.
Anyone else on this topic? Or-
Yeah, I think the other misconception that people have is that by coming to the US, they're not going to be experiencing violence anymore. That there's this understanding that there's a lot of resources. We're one of the richest countries in the world, right? And so that they're coming in and going to find networks of support right away. I think they get told that both from misinformation, both on social media, other family members potentially that are thinking about coming to the US, but also from like the first interactions that they have with the government in Texas or in the border states, right? As to the reason why they're getting them into the bus to begin with and telling them that like, oh, well, you're going to a sanctuary city, right? That the sanctuary city is gonna be able to help you out, give you all these resources, give you housing, without realizing, right, that we are having our own issues internally here in Chicago in regards to like the stock that we have around affordable housing.
Thank you, Antonio.
Right, I thought of one more. Do we have it? This is a long story, but I promise I'll cut it short. So we're trying to house everyone at Todos para Todos. I promise I will tell you this whole story at some point, but we're trying to move everybody desperately into housing. Our community home needs to close. We're moving folks into housing. And there was somebody, we're trying to show them this apartment. It's affordable for them, right? Which means that it is not perfect, let's say. And they're telling me, no, I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna wait for the government housing. So wait, tell me more about this. I would love to know what government housing means to you. And they show me a Facebook post by someone who seems to be American, presumably right-wing by the Facebook post page that I'm looking at. And the post has pictures of a beautiful home. Looks like it was in, I don't know, the north side, the marble, you know the whole bit. And they're showing me this, and the caption says, these are the homes that the migrants are getting in the sanctuary cities, right? You can imagine the propaganda, right? And trying to explain to my buddy that this is propaganda, honey. There is no such thing as this government housing. It was a difficult conversation, right? But this misinformation is a real issue. It's a problem, and it's being actively used in nefarious ways.
Thank you for that, Kathleen. One, I think, just sort of stage setting question that I maybe should have started with, but I want to make sure each of you can answer it in turn. Can you just explain a little bit more, each of you, how you are interfacing with the migrants, kind of what your relationship to this is? I know I gave the brief introductions, but I just want to make sure everybody is clear on kind of why we're all here. So
I just talked, and I'll talk here. Go this way first.
So I work for the Committee on Immigrant Refugee Rights, which is a city council body with, I'm one of 3 staffers. We're not an extension of the mayor's office or the executive departments. Our function per the city statute is to sort of hold hearings and be the first point of where legislation passes through in order to explore that legislation or to explore a topic. And so my kind of interaction is obviously, it's an immigrant and refugee rights issue. And so we were kind of thrown into it. And also, in a very real way, the 40th Ward, before I moved from 40th Ward to the committee, had a police district where, new arrivals were staying at for a really long time, and so we were part of the mutual aid fabric, and so both angles are how we got involved.
I'm a reporter for Borderless Magazine, which is a magazine based in Chicago, and we write about immigrants and refugees in the area. And so the migrant crisis was obviously something that we were we had to write about and have to stay tuned into. And so as a reporter, having conversations with folks in shelters or folks just in general who are coming to Chicago and who are immigrating here from Venezuela, Haiti, Colombia, Nicaragua, all of the, so many different countries. And so as a reporter, I have the opportunity to get to talk to people and kind of hear about their experiences, hear what's going on, and use our platform at Borderless in order to share their stories, share their experiences. For example, like thinking about TPS again, like I was speaking to a migrant who was trying to apply for TPS, but as we kind of talked about earlier, right, there are so many barriers, language barriers. The application is in English. On top of that, it's $500, and how are people supposed to get that if they don't have work permits? And the questions are crazy too that they ask you. So yeah, that's kind of my connection is, being a reporter and being able to speak to people and elevate their stories and voices and experiences.
So as it was said, it does sound like a little bit louder when I talk, but so as it was said, I'm one of the organizers of OCAD, Organized Communities Against Deportations. We've been leading the work around anti-deportation work in the city of Chicago for more than 13 years. And we're an undocumented-led organization, right? Which that means is that we are always on the ground in regards to what the immigrant communities are experiencing, both in regards to like ICE, going into our communities to do raids, all the way to like what happens during the deportation process and ways to interrupt that process as well. So when we started seeing the new arrived immigrants coming to the city of Chicago, we started a mutual aid fund, which we have done during the COVID years. So we opened that up again to start requesting for donations from the public. Then we started doing cash assistance, going to the police stations, providing actual cash to individuals, and at the same time, discuss with them about change of address or change of venues so that their immigration documents could actually be sent or be put in the court dockets here in Chicago. Because many of them, this wasn't not their first stop, especially in the beginning months when we started seeing the influx of people. They were actually coming from other cities, from other states already, and had already gone through at least one court process or had court documents for that city. So we needed to help them just to kind of make the change so that now immigration knew that they were no longer in that city and they were in Chicago. Now we are doing also TPS and asylum workshops. The way we are doing that proactively, because there's so many individuals that need that support, is that we're training volunteers that many of the times are bilingual and helping attorneys are training them to then be able to then help the individual fill out the form, because yes, it's a complicated form, and yes, you want to make sure that everything is in there is accurate, but it's also not that complicated of a form, right? Like it's in English, as long as you can understand English, you can answer the questions in itself. And then we have our attorneys or a group of attorneys that we work with, they review those applications before they are sent. Our mutual aid now is also providing the cash for the fees that are involved within the work permits, TPS, and asylum. But as people were saying, right, like there is ultimately so much that our mutual aid can do, and so many people that we can offer that support. And so knowing that we're not going to be able to support every single individual that is right now within the shelter system in the city of Chicago, that's another component, right? Getting access to the shelters has been very difficult. Now that individuals are not at the police stations where we actually had a lot of direct contact with them, now we're not able to really provide them with that change of venue or address support, or even kind of get to know them a little bit better, just to kind of continue to build the relationships, which is going to be very important for us, right? We're not a service organization. We are a community organization that builds relationships with individuals that get empowered to become leaders for our community. And so that's been a real challenge right now, that most people are in the shelters. We are going to start doing some workshops in the shelters. There's actually one that's going to start this Friday. And so we're going to start getting access to those individuals. And we hope that that in itself will instruct us a little bit better of an understanding around what is happening inside, what the conditions are, and also what are the most immediate needs that now our community or these recently arrived immigrants have. In regards to ATU, or the Autonomous Tenants Union, what we are seeing is that interacting with new recently arrived immigrants, especially those that are now lucky enough to get permanent housing or some kind of apartment through the private sector market, either by support of organizations like Catholic Charities or other city programs, that at the end of the day, they are not really, they're being instructed that if they kind of get into any trouble, they could potentially be evicted. The landlords are intimidating them. And so when we have tried to actually knock on their doors and engage them in regards to what kind of conditions they have, because ultimately many of these immigrants, which also has happened for many undocumented immigrants even before this crisis that we had, is that they end up in housing that is subsidized housing, that is not really dignified, that is in bad conditions, that is not even a legal apartment with 2 exits. And those have been issues that ATU has been addressing since our beginning, or since the organization began in 2016. And now those migrants are also being put in those same places that are not dignified enough for, let's say, a higher income, middle class, or younger person that is looking to move into one of our neighborhoods. And so that's kind of the support that we're doing, but we're finding a lot of challenges in getting them engaged within the work. Something that OCAD and ATU is doing, and I want to raise it, is potentially something that we can look into. How do we use this statute systemically to address our affordable housing issue that we have in the city and potentially even the state, because it's a state statute, is the Abandoned Housing Rehabilitation Act. So this statute, which is kind of newish, it happened before the pandemic, is a statute at the state level that tells you that if a property has been vacant for longer than a year, you can actually start a lawsuit against that property owner and determine, or get a judge to determine whether you can actually gain ownership temporarily of that property to then convert it into affordable housing, or even in the private sector, potentially even put it into the market again. And so that statute is something that we're using right now. We started that process last summer. We started asking ourselves, how are we going to address the issue not with the influx of migrants, but the issue is the lack of affordable housing. And this gives us an opportunity to really address it, not just for the migrants that are coming, but for anybody that needs housing in the city of Chicago. And so ATU and OCAD and other organizations have been coming together in weekly meetings since June or July of last year. And we've been concentrating, working both with some of the recently arrived migrants, some of them that are very already connected to OCAD because they are staying at our local church in Albany Park, and they've been staying there since May of last year. So we've been supporting them with TPS, asylum, kind of giving them like a thorough assessment or case management around their particular process. They're very involved in the project. And then we also have houseless individuals or individuals that don't have a home or that are in transit or some kind of transitional like housing scenario, and they're all participating. And the meetings in itself are bilingual. We have to have interpreters in every single one so that people can communicate freely. And it's showing that that in itself is a project that also addresses some of these tensions that we have between immigrants that have been here for a long time, even Black communities, and the newly arrived migrants, right? And to have them all talk about the lack of affordable housing and how we can resolve that by using this statute is something that we're still ongoing. I will say that actually today we had one of our first score for one of the properties that we already have a lawsuit against the property owner because that property has been vacant for 4 years. And the property owner has not taken the lawsuit in itself any serious, to the point that he didn't show up today to court, even though he has had attorneys and the attorneys been communicating with our legal team about how they were going to start work on this week, that they hire an architect, that they hire all these workers. And every single time we have gone to the property, it looks like nobody has been there ever since September, since we put our 30 days notice. So that's another project that we're doing. I can talk more about it as we go on in the conversation. Sorry.
All right, thank you, Antonio. Kathleen, do you want to talk a little bit about how Todo para Todos started?
Yeah, so I'm part of Todo para Todos. We are a mutual aid collective that is made up of Chicagoans and newly arrived migrants. Back in May, was it May? I don't even know, the brain is foggy. We wanted to create an alternative to the city shelters. Folks were not being moved in fast enough at that point. You'll recall there were hundreds of new migrants sleeping on the street outside the police station. So we moved. At our height, about 260 people lived in our formerly empty warehouse in Pilsen on 20th and Racine. We converted it into a community home. And it was built with love. It was built through mutual aid. It was built through solidarity, not charity. And it was wonderful. We had ups, we had downs, we had left, right, sideways. It was a wild, wild ride. All volunteer led. We didn't pay anybody for their time. Somebody was there 24/7. We had 3 hot meals a day, all given to us through donations and a heck of a lot of hustle. At one point we had to close, right? And we had not envisioned this project to be long-term anyway. We were wanting and aiming for an endpoint and to get everybody housed. I think it happened to us a little sooner than we had initially been planning for. Around September, we had a confluence of issues happen to us. A lot of our volunteer base are and were educators who had to go back to school, right? And then just lack of funding at that point. We had tried for 90 days, months, begging and pleading with the city to offer us any support at all. In the very end, we were simply asking for our folks to get housing waivers, the same $600 a month that the folks in the city shelter were getting through Catholic Charities. They didn't budge. My folks never ended up getting that. Long story short, we rapid housed almost everybody. I think there were 10 individuals who went, who elected to go into the city shelter system. They wanted to get that funding in the end. We housed nearly everybody. It was a sprint. Juliet was there. She can tell you more about it after the panel. It was quite frankly a clusterfuck, but we did it. Everyone who needed to be housed is housed. The biggest miracle worker for us, I guess, was the Chicago Low Income Housing Trust Program. If you are not familiar with that, the way I understand it, anytime that a deed is transferred, $12 of that transaction goes into this fund. It might be 24 now. I think Pritzker doubled it. Don't quote me on that. In any case, there's a fund. We met a wonderful property manager who is not the grifter that Antonio was just mentioning. He has wonderful housing. We are so grateful to this person. It was pure luck for us who have run into Brad, but he helped us house all of our folks. They're in apartments. Some are doing better than others. Some are really, really struggling, right? And it's a lot of the things that we've been talking about. It's difficulty getting jobs. If folks are needing rent support. But we're not abandoning our group. We are with them till the end. I get questions constantly if our role is to help house others, and I wish dearly that we could, but we're focused on our supporting our immediate group. Will probably be the case for the future.
Thank you, Kathleen. So the next question that I have is going to be specifically for Katrina and for Pooja. One of the things that I know we wanted to talk about tonight was the 60-day notice that there's been a lot of news around, but also I think a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation. It seems like the folks that are living in the shelters are just, there's a lot of panic, there's a lot of uncertainty about what to expect, and there's been a lot of, again, like coverage about the 60-day notice, but at least from what David has told me in conversations is that there's a lot of, again, what that actually is in practice is maybe not what it is in reality. So maybe Pooja, do you want to start, like what is actually the policy that is the 60-day notice that we've been hearing about? And then Katrina, do you want to maybe talk about how that's actually being understood in the shelters and how people are trying to like make sense of it?
Yeah, I feel like there are different realities, like not to case by case reality, but like I think the city puts out a policy and then doesn't have a great process for making sure everyone understands that policy. So the city right now is operating, for this is one example of that, but the city is operating under Rahm Emanuel based language access fund that takes a very small baby step to address the real language access needs, but does not do even close to like 40% job of doing it. So that's an area of legislation that the committee is deeply interested in, is focusing on exploring. But basically, the city can say, we are saying because we are not willing to appropriate more funds, and so it's a lot political at the end of the day, right? We are not willing to appropriate the funds that we need to care for the wave of migrants that's coming in. We have to look back, we have to assess the entire year and say, how many people can we house and for how long can we house them? And give the appropriate eviction notices. That's what the city's doing, right? They're evicting them from the shelter and saying, shelters are temporary, we will evict you. That's what it is. So what happened was we heard the policy come down from the administration, the executive departments. Obviously, as the committee, we're like seeing the gaps and the challenges, and the TRP clinics not working out like they're supposed to work out, and the work authorization permit clinics not working out like they're supposed to work out. The Catholic Charities voucher assistance helping for 3 months and 6 months, but then after that, not working out like it's supposed to work out. So seeing kind of the confluence of all of these things and saying, hey, like you cannot evict people in the cold winter. And so our committee and several volunteers who have, been doing the work that the government should be doing, went around to alders and said, hey, sign on to this letter. We're going to submit it to the mayor to ask him to stay this eviction notice. And so what happens is, like, the government is government. You have a lot of people working there who there are no easy ways to access. I've been asking different various city departments for a long time now, like, what is your standard operating procedure for this process? What do you do this process? We don't get, I don't know if they exist or not, frankly, but we certainly don't get insight onto that. So it's very difficult to amend a process when you don't know what the process is, and you have people who are unwilling to let you into the process, is what we're finding. And so to answer the question, what is supposed to happen is that folks get an eviction notice. From that time, after 60 days, they have to exit the shelter. I heard that some of the contractor vendors have been doing this smarmy ass thing of taking people's belongings when they're not there, and then saying, hey, if you want your items back, you have to come sign an eviction notice, right? So like these things are not things that we hear about unless reporting happens. They don't tell us it's the process. So hopefully that there's some things up, and I'll pass it to Patricia.
Yeah, and I think what I would add to that is that in practice, so the 60-day shelter policy, for those of you who might not know, in the middle of November, the Johnson administration announced that there will be a 60-day shelter policy, meaning that based on like a tiered system, depending on when you entered the shelters, you would receive a 60-day notice from that point to be evicted from the shelter, with the goal of making sure that we keep saying, oh, shelters are temporary, let's move people into long-term housing. But the reality is, we look at the numbers, right? There are about 14,000 people in Chicago shelters. And the numbers that they're giving us, the city, the government is giving us, is that only 1,000 or so of those people have gotten work permits. And the people who are helping with the resettlement process is Catholic Charities. Only as of 2 weeks ago did Catholic Charities have case managers in all of the shelters. Before that point, there weren't Catholic Charities resettlement case managers in all of the shelters. And to top that off, the Catholic Charities folks aren't there every day. They're there like maybe 4 days of the week, but in reality, no one's overseeing that process. We don't really, and there's a lack of transparency as well. Like, we don't really know what the Catholic Charities folks are doing and who they're resettling. Based on the numbers that I've seen so far, it's about 4,000-ish people, right? But it's been what? Almost a year and a half into this crisis, and we've only rehoused and resettled something like 4,000 people. So what are we going to do with the other 10,000? And now we're putting in this 60-day shelter policy, expecting that people are going to be able to find housing, but they haven't been able to find housing to this point. The concern for a lot of folks is like, how am I going to be able to find housing now? I haven't been able to find housing since I've gotten into the shelters, and now I'm being kicked out, being forced to find housing on my own. Like, communicating with landlords who maybe don't speak the language that I speak. I don't have money to pay for rent. And on top of that, the state's emergency rental assistance program where they started this asylum seeker emergency rental assistance program, which is a rental assistance program specifically for asylum seekers, and that was paused for anyone who came into shelters after the middle of November. So not only are we expecting people to be able to find their own housing, to be able to move out, but now to be able to move out with no rental assistance, and the people who were receiving rental assistance or applying to receive it, it went from 6 months of rental assistance to 3 months instead. And so it's almost impossible to think about how are people really going to settle in with only 60 days to find housing. On top of that, needing to find rent within 3 months, if they even get the rental assistance program, and based on the Catholic Charities numbers, right, that's only like 4,000 of the 15,000 people who are in the shelters. And so hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And actually, the next question will be for Antonio, because we brought up Catholic Charities. So Antonio is, I know you've been dealing with this on the ground in Albany Park in particular. Can you talk a little bit about how we are also seeing Catholic Charities and landlords basically working together to evict people that are already living in homes? And I mean, there's Catholic Charities, there's also the Gary Carlson case. So I'll let you take it however you want to handle that.
Yeah, no, and I think overall, like when we talk about the 60 days notice, right? I have firsthand seen what a notice to vacate, whether it's 30 days or 60 days, does to families. It creates this traumatic like stage for them in regards to like, if I don't find housing, I'm going to be on the street. Right? So you can imagine that that's the first thing that these recently arrived migrants are coming to know about Chicago, is that I have 60 days to get out of this shelter, or else I don't know where I'm gonna go. And if they leave the shelters, right, then they don't receive the support that Catholic Charities might be able to do in regards to finding that housing. What I want to tell you all about is a campaign that ATU did, not in relationship to the recently arrived immigrants. At least not, we didn't think that it was connected in the beginning, but we were fighting and supporting a couple of tenants that unfortunately were subsidized tenants through the voucher or the housing voucher program at the Chicago Housing Authority, CHA. CHA ended the contract with the landlord, a very notorious landlord, because we all have seen news from them about conditions, about a fire that happened about a couple of years ago, Gary Carson. And so after CHA ended that contract with Gary Carson, because of multiple lawsuits that the city of Chicago currently still has against Gary Carson for the conditions of those buildings, they ended that contract and told about 500 or so individuals that they needed to relocate, that they need to find another property, another apartment that will hopefully get or approve their housing voucher to be used and to relocate within 60 days. They were also just given 60 days. Then you have 500 low income, fixed income individuals fighting for the very shortage amount of subsidized housing that we have in the city of Chicago. And ultimately that was creating chaos. ATU and another organization in Albany Park started supporting some of the tenants that live in the Gary Carson building in the Albany Park area. And that went on for a while. We learned a lot about CHA internal policies. They eventually started giving relocation assistance, providing actual case managers to many of the individuals we were working. But we also only worked with about like 50 to 100 of those tenants in like directly of the 550 or so that were living in subsidized housing that Gary Carson owned. All of a sudden, as we were doing that campaign, and that campaign is almost to be done, is now there's about like 10 individuals that still need to relocate, hopefully find a different alternative to housing with the housing voucher, is that as those units were becoming available, either because the tenant left and found another, hopefully another housing voucher property, CHA won't disclose that to us about how many of those 550 individuals are still within the portfolio. So we don't know what exactly they went or whether they actually were able to get housing. But as people were leaving, Gary Carson was then going into these apartments with his team, putting a new set of paint on top of mold, on top of the conditions that those tenants were dealing already with, which was the reason why CHA ended the contract to begin with, and then started putting or working with what it sounds like Catholic Charities to then put some of the new real arrived immigrants into those units. And so now there's been this dynamic where some of the tenants that we work with the Gary Carson campaign, right away started noticing that new people were coming into those units where the neighbor was, where all of a sudden they knew that the neighbor left, and within a week, there was a new family there that didn't speak English. And in our meetings themselves, xenophobic or anti-immigrant sentiments and statements were done, and we had to approach them and deal with them, even though many of the individuals that we're working with are immigrants or descendants of immigrants, right, or are Black, because again, CHA housing is only available for citizens or residents. Undocumented people are automatically excluded because of their federal funding. And so that's another thing that we dealt with. We actually went with another nonprofit, the North River Commission, which to us, they tend to have a little bit more of a network in regards to better relationships with landlords than ATU, because ATU is not very liked by landlords. And we tried to work with them about finding out how were these migrants being positioned into these units? Like, how is it that those contracts are being done? And we found out that Catholic Charities was the one kind of connecting them. And so then we tried going through North River Commission to try to set up a meeting with Catholic Charities, and they refused to meet with us. We offer support, telling them our organizers can go and just kind of do a quick overview of conditions of the apartments that you potentially are going to put migrants. You don't need to pay us. You don't need to do anything. We will do all that groundwork for you. And they completely refused. They said that unless we had a contract with the state, that they were not going to disclose any information to us. And this was not even told to us as ATU, right? It was told to North River Commission, which again is known for having a better relationship not only with local landlords in Albany Park, but also known for their politics are very neutral and very liberal compared to ATU, which we are a leftist, anti-capitalist organization, right? And so to just have Catholic Charities have that type of response with no River Commission, I can only imagine if I would directly contacted them as ATU to ask the same questions. And unfortunately, as we have heard already, Catholic Charities right now is holding a lot of information in regards to how those placements are happening, how those relationships are being built with those landlords. Are they even making sure that those landlords or property owners don't have an existing lawsuit with the city, which is public record? It would have not taken them that long to find out that Gary Carson has multiple lawsuits, that the city of Chicago is still in court with them, and they're trying to negotiate some kind of settlement.
And when
unfortunately,
we
that
ask,
wasn't done.
about that, because we've also asked about Catholic Charities resettlement information. The government loves to point fingers at other jurisdictional governments. So we'll say, hey, city, we just want to check up and see how it's going. They'll be like, well, we don't have that data. The state has the data because the state has the contract. And then we'll ask the state, hey, can you give us this data? And they'll be like, no, it's all private information. We never want to release privacy records of folks. And we're like, no one is asking for private information. We're just asking for, disaggregated, anonymized information. Can you give that to us? And what ends up happening is reporters who know how to file FOIAs, well, much better than I do personally, get that information. And then we have to say, all right, guys, what's going on? It's not good. That's yeah, it's not mathing, and that's what ends up happening even with us. And I work for the city, so you would expect I know information and I can ask for information and get it easily. That's unfortunately not the case. There's so many layers of security and protection, and just to hop on my leftist soapbox for a second, any government is interested in status quo, right? They are not interested however much they might say they're interested in change. It is not easy, especially a municipality of a city. We're all couched in the state and federal operations. There's only so much the local municipality can do, and that, the government's interest is not to. The government in the United States will never be leftist without other massive changes that will happen.
Catholic Charities, this has turned into a Catholic Charities rant. We're auditing them. What happened to us, they told us that they were going to help us. They promised us, so we gave them our list of folks, and they told us they were going to house them. Nothing. They ghosted us, not one word since September. We think they're going to use our data and count them as, oh, hey, we housed these 260 people. They absolutely did not. Rant on Catholic Charities.
Thank you all for weighing in on that. It's been really disturbing and distressing to see, in particular, for example, the Johnson administration and the Pritzker administration just having a little war of words when people's lives are at stake. That's been pretty depressing the last few days. I'm sorry, especially on the inside as a government person, you're like, you only, and I'm sure you probably have people come up to you and be like, you're the government, so therefore you must know everything and have all the power and all that, so.
Every day, and I'm like, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, we won't subject that to that. But, I know that we're gonna move to Q&A from the audience in a few minutes. I wanna end this portion of the conversation with just a little reflection from everyone here about, you know, what we keep saying, what David started us with at the beginning. We have solutions that are solutions for everybody, not just the migrants that are coming in now or that have come in recently, but for all of the unhoused folks that already live here, for everybody that's struggling with rent. You know, just to plug, if you do not know about the legislation that our coalition is working on, Just Cause for Eviction, you should have the fact sheet with you. That would be tremendously helpful for everybody, right? To say that you should not get evicted if you've done nothing wrong. There are clear reasons why you can be asked to move. That's something that would have had a huge impact in the situation with the Gary Carlson buildings, because then there would have been more relocation assistance, for example. So all that to say, we have some really incredible examples of folks here that have done the work on the ground to treat everybody that's coming in like a human being. Which is true of organizations working with unhoused folks in the city. There are ways that we can do all these things to actually do this humanely, thoughtfully, carefully, and all of that. Given that that is, I think, the shared goal of everyone on this panel, I would love to just maybe hear a few words from each of you about, yeah, what your vision is for getting us to a place where that is what we are actually doing, whether it's specific policies that maybe are in this document, or just like a general approach or attitude, anything that, you know, you can speak to on that topic.
I mean, this is the best set of policy recommendations I've read in a long time, and I've read about 100 different variations of this. Great work, guys. We can get everybody housed. We can get everyone housed, not just new migrants. I think we need to think creatively. I think we need to be a little bit bolder, a lot bit bolder, maybe. Get in and help, take action. Help us pass some of these legislations, tap in where you can, and please come help us bring our new neighbors and build a new community together.
I think for me, I've only been working for the government for like 2 years, right? So it's my first, I came in with such rose-colored glasses that government wants to do anything possible to help people. And I say that and I'm like, what a naive expletive. But I think that we should push our representatives to root their work in the folks that are the most harmed. I think even in the mutual aid volunteerification of all this, a lot of elected officials are relying on mutual aid to still do a lot of work. And fundamentally, like, I think, believe that volunteerism is such a big part of government. And like, that's kind of icky to me.
Yes.
And I think I think, I mean, I myself, right? I'm a upper middle class, like, person who speaks English. And I think most of the people who work on policy are like that as well. And that feels wrong. So I feel like we should ask more of our elected officials to represent us in the work that they, not us, but represent folks that they claim to represent. Yes.
Yeah, I have a lot of wrap up thoughts, so hopefully it's, I don't know, I'm trying to like figure out how to say everything, but I guess one of the first things is that this is such a great set of policy recommendations, and there's so many ways that we can think about change in our lives, and that's like on small, like medium, large levels. And when I think about this crisis, right, the small ways and tangible ways we can help, like throughout Chicago, we've seen volunteers stepping up to open their homes to let people stay there temporarily, or crowdsourcing donations, or kind of with Toto para Todos, right? Like thinking about how we can connect with one family and just being able to use the resources that we have to redistribute that to other folks, right? And think about what we have and how we can share that with other people so that they can, you know, pay for their housing while they're trying to settle in. Then we have the, you know, on the next level, the set of policy recommendations and pushing for that. pushing for just cause, pushing for rent control and other things like that because housing affordability is such an issue. Because those are the long-term solutions, right? We have immediate solutions we can do, like temporary housing, donations, mutual aid, all of that work, and crowdsourcing money. And then we have those long-term things that will make things change in the future. And I think two more things to say about that is one thing is, I'm sure everyone here is kind of thinking about this or know this, but this is not a zero-sum game. And I think that's something that a lot of folks have been saying. And I think it's really important to think about how policies that impact housing justice, that impact housing affordability, they benefit us all, right? And it's really easy to think about the ways that when the migrant crisis came, right, obviously there's been some government money that's invested into that crisis. And for folks who have been historically for many, many years, disinvested in, not having any money for housing, affordable housing and all that stuff, it's really easy to see that and be like, how come we haven't gotten any money? And that's true, right? Because historically, like, that's what it's looked like. But when we think about policies that make the world better for all of us, when we think about affordable housing, right, that means affordable housing for migrants and affordable housing for the folks who've already been living here for such a long time. When we think about rent control, right, in the future, that means rent control for migrants and for people who are already here. And just cause, for example, too, when we're thinking about situation with landlords kicking people out, kicking their tenants out so we can get subsidized housing and charge people more and make money off of migrants and off of the government, right? We have something like just cause in place, means that folks can't get kicked out so that landlords can make more money. Because at the end of the day, it's landlords trying to make money, trying to figure out how to game the system. Housing is a commodity to them. They want to make money off of that. And so I'm kind of rambling there. And my last thing, kind of what Pooja said too, is movement of people, movement. I think media is one part of it, bringing attention to situation is one part of it, right? But government officials will never do what we want them to do unless we make them believe we want them to do it, right? Like, especially with the migrant crisis, right? We saw how public opinion and how people's care kind of changed surrounding the situation when it wasn't as visible. When things were visible, when people were in police districts, when people were on the streets, when people were not in the shelters yet, everyone was like, oh my gosh, they're everywhere. Like, this is such a crisis. Versus now, folks are in shelters. No one's allowed in shelters. Media is not allowed in shelters. Mutual aid volunteers are not allowed in shelters, right? And so the government is able to get migrants out of the public eye. And because of that change in visibility, right? They're like, okay, problem solved. Like, we don't have to think about this anymore. But as long as we keep pushing and keep pushing for the things that we believe in and understanding about how housing justice, affordable housing, migrant crisis, immigration is all tied together, and organizing as a group, I believe we can make change. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would say that we need to do a 180 complete change to these neoliberal like policies and procedures that are literally just band-aids that are not approaching the actual issues that we see at root of what we're seeing as far as this crisis, right? Like, we're literally wasting money right now. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of vacant and abandoned properties throughout the city of Chicago. What would it look like for all of those millions of dollars that is going to all these temporary shelters, for the staff that is coordinating or managing them supposedly, to instead go to these properties, which the city can really accelerate the process to get them out of those private property owners that own them, that has led them into disrepair or abandonment, occupy them, fix them, and in the process of fixing them, potentially even hire the migrants and people that are unhoused to then kind of create a cycle of economic opportunity for everybody that then will create affordable social housing that will be accessible not just for the migrants, but for anybody that needs it. But in order for us to do that, we need to stop counting housing as a commodity or something that only landlords can profit, or that's something that we need to pay in order to get access, and really see housing as a human right. And until we're ready to push, because it's not about whether we want it or not. I think elected officials don't do anything unless we push them and we pressure them to do it. And until our society and our communities are organized in order to make those demands and that pressure, we're not gonna see it. So the work really starts on the ground with those directly impacted from my perspective.
Great. Thank you so much to Annie for moderating the panel. We have to explore to the question, or the next 30 minutes for our question and answer section. We have a couple of questions that have already come up in the chat, but if folks have questions after we ask those, well, you can just raise your hand and I'll bring you the mic. So the first question that we have from Sabina is, why does the city continue to use separate shelter and supportive services for the migrants versus other individuals experiencing homelessness? What would it take to merge the system so that it's a unified and equitable effort to house all individuals who need housing? Oh, okay, and then the next question is, how can we trust departments like DFSS with migrant children when they have a legacy of separating BIPOC children from their families?
Targeted. That's sweet. I think two things are true. One, we receive a lot of dollars from the federal government that have like requirements. And if the city doesn't meet those requirements, they don't get the dollars. And then the second layer to that is that if this continuum of care does not have the internal policy of merging those those different types of shelters, it just doesn't happen, right? So part of the committee that I'm on, our research is in the unification of shelter process. I think one reason that I've heard from DFSS and Department of Family Social Support Services and Department of Housing at the city level is that they currently operate shelters based on needs. So they have shelters for pregnant people, they have shelters for youth, and so it's very specialized. And so they say like the needs for new arrivals are very different, and you don't get the economies of scale. I'll go back to economies of scale because we're working with a small budget that the city is willing to appropriate. So based on that, they do the shelter. So the unification would demand, I think, a higher amount of coordination would demand a higher amount of coordination than the city is currently giving, and a higher amount of funding that the city is currently not giving. Just the family separation, again, I don't know I don't have access to Department of Family and Social Support Services' operating procedure. And so again, unless we are brought to the table to voice our concerns, it's hard for me as the committee, a person on the committee, to get access to that information. But we have heard that over the course of like the last couple of weeks. We've raised it up to folks and gotten insufficient responses. And so I think the policy proposals, getting the alders who you believe are allies to explore explore those things in a public way and a private way, and either commit to prioritizing it or have them say this is not a priority for me, and that's how you know what their priorities are.
Does anybody in the audience have a question? Yeah, okay, Grace.
Hello. What I was interested in, I haven't seen a lot of information about come March, these eviction notices, how they are going to be enforced. Because with eviction notices for tenants, there's a very set procedure. So I was wondering if there was any information about how those notices would be enforced in the shelters.
Yeah, and some of the mutual aid volunteers already started this conversation. I'm part of those meetings right now where we were already thinking, right, that like January 29 was gonna happen and we were gonna start seeing some of these evictions. Apparently what I have also learned through the process of this Abandoned Housing Rehabilitation Act, and yes, I just said it again so that people are paying attention, is that if we get one of these properties, our legal team is recommending us to convert them into shelters, which will require a zoning change. And what I'm also learning through that process is that in the shelter system, it's similar to like when you rent an Airbnb or a hotel room. You don't leave. The police can be called and they will physically extract you or take you out of the situation. I'm not saying that that's potentially what the city is thinking, but they do have the power as individuals are in the shelter system to potentially still just do that. to just have CPD come and throw their belongings away. We started hearing some like remarks or some things in regards to people in the shelters saying that staff inside the shelters were intimidating them, that if they wouldn't leave, that the police was gonna come, that they were gonna get their stuff thrown away, that if they had kids, that they were gonna get separated from their kids, which has happened before, even when people were at police stations and they were refusing to go to shelters, they got told that if they wouldn't leave the police station and go to a shelter, that they were gonna take their kids away. And either do that or they can go outside into a tent. And even if they do find them that they were just sleeping outside in a tent, that then the possibility of taking their kids was still there. So what are like families supposed to do with that information other than have fear of this whole process that everybody's training, and unfortunately nobody's giving clarity as to how exactly it's gonna happen in a dignified way. But of course, we all know that evictions, regardless of how they happen, they are never dignified.
Yeah, and I think something that I would add to that is that from what the city has said with their extension on the 60-day policy, like apparently now there's supposed to be a system in place where there's 2 checkpoints before a person is evicted from the shelter after the 60 days. The first checkpoint is something like 14 days after the, like 14 days into like your shelter stay. You're supposed to have a checkpoint. It's supposed to be like, hey, how are things going? Are you able to find housing like this and that? The second checkpoint is supposed to determine whether or not you'll get another stay of eviction. You'll get another extension on your eviction notice. That second check-in is supposed to be like, oh, if you have a disability or if you have family issues, like a family member has just passed away or something like that. What is being said is that you will be able to get an extension on your eviction notice. But in reality, right, the way we've seen the shelters being run, right, there are not enough case managers in the shelters in the first place to be doing this kind of work. On top of that, people who are the case managers in the shelter, right? Our shelters are run mostly by Favorite Staffing, which is a Kansas-based staffing company that the city has paid millions of dollars to run our shelters. But these Favorite staffers often don't have oversight from city officials. They're contracted labor, right? So the city doesn't always have control over what they're doing. And the ways we're seeing people being policed inside shelters are through things called incident reports. And Favorite Staffing can file incident reports about shelters or about residents within the shelter and about migrants. So some of the data that I've seen so far, there's been at least 13,000 incident reports filed since the impetus of this system, or since the beginning of this system. And these incident reports can range from anything like curfew violations. Some nights I see hundreds of curfew violations in a shelter. And things like incident reports can get people kicked out of shelters. So kind of building off of what Antonio said, it's a really discriminatory and subjective system where they can kind of just Favorite Staffing mixed with, you know, the police enforcement and the folks who are running the shelters. They can kind of just file these incident reports against people, kind of just do whatever without a lot of oversight, right? And you know, the plans that are being set to put in place in implementation are not actually happening in terms of how people are getting these extensions. I mean, we've seen the difficulty of getting people resettled. So thinking about how that might play out to the extension system, like who really knows? And yeah, I guess I don't have the answer to that.
Yeah, and I think what Katrina just shared, right, like it made me think, like, if we do the math, if there's 30,000 individuals that have come or recently arrived immigrants to the city since August, right, like, and there's 15 or 14,000 that are in the shelter system, there's 4,000 or so that Catholic Charities find permanent housing, that still leaves about less than or more than 10,000 individuals that we don't know what happened to them, right? That they were already potentially evicted through these incident reports. And so evictions are already happening at the shelter systems. It's not just that these notices will then happen.
I will say, just to clarify that, a lot of folks have been out-migrated to different states, which is what we've been told. We've been told no evictions per se have happened. So like, we've asked that question, we've asked the same question, and they say the rest, you know, when they come in, they have the layer of Catholic Charities securing train, bus, whatever rides to other states where people have family. And so they've said like, oh, they've been out-migrated.
So what is the percentage?
Unclear.
Okay, let's have Moy ask this question in the chat.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Can you folks hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Hi, this is Moy Moreno. I use pronounce he, him. I'm with Pilsen Alliance. I kind of disagree with some of what was just said about, I don't know if I just heard correctly, but folks are being displaced from shelters. There are being folks that have been brought through the system and have been kind of spit out, and right now they're encamped in tents in the cold right now because of the systemic institutional failure of our city, our elected officials, across the board. I unfortunately was not able to participate in public comment yesterday in the immigration committee meeting. I think they cut short public comment. I think that was wrong, because I wanted to come up and speak, right? I wanted to say, hey, folks are being harmed right now as we speak, and I don't really see or feel any kind of short-term or long-term housing plan to put folks into permanent housing. I did wanted to pitch to the city council folks, hey, let's talk about social housing. Let's talk about ways we could like not use the same model, right, of housing that's been putting folks in harm, not just migrants, but Black and brown people in the city of Chicago. Let's really tackle this, right? So I feel like these voices are being stifled out in public spaces like city council. And I think that's wrong. I think that shows poor leadership from our elected officials. And definitely my question really is, what is the plan? What is the short-term and long-term housing plan to get migrants and everybody into housing? I feel like postponing the evictions is just kicking the can down the road, just like Governor Pritzker did during the pandemic. So I do want to see folks step up, and let's not forget that a child died, right? In our city, in our community. And I think the more we talk about it, the less we can ignore it, right? So this should not happen again. And the folks that we're working with directly have gone through so much trauma that we don't even know where to start, right? So yeah, I'll wrap up my question. So what is the plan? What especially to the folks that are working in city council, where do y'all want to take this to, right? That's the question.
You and I were just said this, it's kicking the can down the road. It's
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Could be-
Yeah,
There
I
is
think
no plan.
the first, I think I remember you from the meeting yesterday. Public comment is limited to 30 minutes and we had a list and so we had to stop once we got to 30 minutes. So, you know.
It wasn't 30 minutes, but go ahead.
It was, what I want to, I mean, those are great questions about like what the plan is. We've heard, when we've asked, we've heard something called like a go forward plan is what the city is, the mayor's administration is calling it. And I think they are working with, and not to us disclosed any information, but you know, we're asking them to soon, it's apparently a plan to spend the $150 million that was allocated for fiscal year 24, and also how they're packaging spending with the state and the county is what I believe we've heard. Pending conversations also with the federal government about like, are there, you know, the supplemental package that's being passed in Congress, will Chicago receive any like SSP money from that shelter supportive program, money from that? They have told us that we are not, that they don't have a complete plan to share with us yet, but we are asking and are hopeful. So that's where I am. I don't know OCAD. I feel like sometimes I hear from OCAD folks that y'all have better information than we do as the committee. So I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, no, we're going to continue to pursue both OCAD and ATU, right? Like this state statute that is allowing us to be at least in court right now. The judge today, I heard from the legal team, didn't even know that statute. So it is to that point, right, that like nobody has actually seemed to have used it already in practice. So we're kind of the first ones kind of doing it on the ground. And so we hope that we can get some buildings out of that situation. We already have about $150,000 that is coming from private foundations to renovate those projects or those buildings. So we have the capital ready. We just need the properties to kind of start doing that work and then start housing people so that we can then create a precedent, because we know that Oakland is not going to be able to get a bunch of buildings. And what does that look like? We also don't want to become a landlord, right? But we want other organizations to find out about this. The nonprofits, all nonprofits can actually file this lawsuit. Let's provide them with the legal tools in order to file those lawsuits. But the filing happened on October 1st of last year. after we have to give the landlord or the property owner a 30 days notice that we're going to file this lawsuit, after those 30 days, you then get to file, and our first court was today, right? So like, that is not a long, like that process taking too long for us to imagine and start working on the solutions right now, but it's what we have right now. And we're even thinking about all the alternatives that are much more out there that unfortunately I cannot talk about right now, but those solutions are there, and there are solutions that are coming out from the creativity of those directly impacted, right? Again, migrants and our house folks that are coming together, working together, getting to know each other better, and understanding that like this system was not created for them. So like, what can we do to create something for ourselves?
I think I saw.
Yeah, do we have a hand in the audience?
I just want to add something like related to.
Hello, my name is Carla Lopez, and I'm a program manager in one of the shelters. And like I'm living this situation every day. We have too many clients in the shelter, and I'm fighting with favorites sometimes. I have a meeting today in the morning with a Catholic charities, and for me, it doesn't make any sense. Like they wanna like take all these immigrants, the new arrivals, to land zoning, to the. So like when they want to to kick out these persons to another landing zone, and then they have to start the process to going again to a shelter. But the ones that was there in the shelter before November 17th, they can apply for 3 months at least for rental assistance. But if they kick them out, like if they have to start again with a new process, they lose everything. So it doesn't make any sense, because they don't have nothing. So we start again like the same like when we started in the beginning. They don't have nothing because they cannot take a lot of things to the new landing zone. So they start like with nothing when they came here. And after more than 1 year and a half, they going to back with the same situation, with nothing. So I think it's like a situation is like running and around, and we need a solution, not just like just have little help for now. Like, okay, I'm taking to the landing zone, and then you have to start with a process and going again back to the shelter, and then what? What are they going to do? If they don't have any permit to work, they don't have any money, they don't have job, they don't have anything. So what do you want to do with them? Like, it's really hard. It's a really hard situation, and we try to find a solution. And I hope we can help them because it's not fair for them if you come here and now what do you want to do with them? They are here already, so you have to find a solution. Otherwise, why do you bring them here? Like it's really hard situation. Sorry, I'm a little nervous.
Okay. Thank you very much. Other questions?
I feel like this was one in the panel, but as a reporter, I know that the government knew, or at least the city of Chicago knew, months in advance before the first bus arrived. I think since like springtime of 2022, and I just don't understand why. I don't understand why there was a strategic plan. Maybe 2022 was a bit chaotic, was unexpected, but for 2023, I still don't understand why there was just no organization. Katrina, she reported on the Pilsen shelter, and the living conditions were horrific. And then a few days later, a 5-year-old died in the shelter or at the hospital. But either way, he was in horrible conditions at the shelter. I live in South Loop, and during the below zero temperatures, my washing machine didn't work anymore because it froze or something. So I had to go to West Loop or West Town, somewhere in the west side, to wash my clothes. And it was all Venezuelan migrants, and they were in just t-shirts and like cotton shirts going outside with a shit ton of laundry, and their babies were wearing like flip-flops.
So I just don't understand why there isn't any organization. I do wonder, like, where is the United Nations, where is UNHCR? But from my understanding is that the minute someone seeks asylum in the US, it's the government's responsibility. So it's very strategic of Texas to do this. So yeah, I don't know if it's a question, but I just want to know why, like, almost 2 years later, there's no strategic plan. Like as you said, Antonio, there's so many empty buildings. Why don't they put the millions of dollars they're putting towards shelters and temporary housing into high quality shelters where kids are warm? Yeah, do you have any comments?
I mean, you and me both. I mean, we operated a shelter in an empty warehouse and it went fine. We can be putting people in homes with a roof over their head that is safe and not carceral, and you and me both, my friend. I have a lot of wonderings.
And like maybe to add on that, I think it's important to think about, like, there were 30,000 Ukrainian refugees who came to Chicago, and we found a way to not only give them immediate work authorization, immediate work permits, right, to get them into housing. We're a year and a half into Chicago's migrant crisis, and almost 30,000 people have come here, or more than that, 34,000 people have come to Chicago, immigrants. And I think there's a lot of parts to that equation, and one of the parts is with Ukraine, for example, there was a federal movement, right, to give them immediate work permits. With Venezuelan migrants, with migrants from Latin America, right, we haven't seen that same energy being put towards the situation, which is what has been making it so difficult, right? People are waiting years, months to get work permits. And then on top of that, so you have like these federal problems, right? And then when there's no appetite for that sort of change, right, I feel like it doesn't happen. And what Antonio was saying before, if no one's pushing, not that no one is pushing for it, but like, yeah, we need to push harder and our voices need to be louder in order for them. They're not going to do anything, you know, the government, DFSS, Department of Family and Social Services, Illinois Housing Development Authority, Chicago Housing Authority, these like government structures, right? They're not going to do stuff that's out of their convenience just because they want to, just because it's like for the good of the people, right? So to keep pushing for these things to change, but yeah, I think it's important to think about the federal response as well. Not that it's just a federal thing. City of Chicago needs to step up, state needs to step up, but comparing that difference, right, with Ukrainians and Venezuelans, right, the amount of resources that we've allocated to people and how we've treated them, not only how we treat immigration in general, but how we treat, you know, work permits and all of that stuff.
And that's something that we literally in a meeting today with our elected congressperson brought that up, and they basically said, hey, we don't have, you know, it's an election year. The political thing is kind of looms in the back. People aren't willing to say it with their whole chest, but they basically were like, hey, our, you know, this representative has used political, like all of the political capital that they have to get the TPS Venezuelan extension, and the Biden administration won't do more. So we are not going to ask for it. So they're just all sorts of party barriers when you get to the state and the federal level that we don't really outright see how that affects the local level, but because, you know, in Chicago, everyone's a progressive, or whatever the hell that means on council. But like those real challenges come from not being able to secure any money, then the state not getting any money, then the city not getting any money, or the statuses, they trickle down from the federal level. We asked the representative, hey, is there a way that you can push for states to authorize work permits, like give states, you know, we love state choice in this country because of Republicans these days. So like give states the opportunity to authorize work permits. And they're like, well, no, that would still require a congressional amendment, and that's a non-starter. So it is a lot of jurisdictional function.
Yeah.
We have time for one or two more questions, either in the audience or in the chat.
Thanks so much, everyone, for talking. I'm just wondering about like the public health aspect of the shelters too, and I correct me if I'm wrong, but no shelters have been shut down by the Department of Public Health. I'm totally confused about that. Like what's going on with that department?
Great question. I also have the same question. I mean, in the Halsted shelter, our elected was very, very proud of himself for having, after Juan Carlos's death, gotten permission to go into that shelter. We were like, what? Why did that happen? We all know it happened, but I don't know. I don't know that there are regular visits into the shelter. I haven't been able to get in. Nobody's been able to get in. I don't know.
I also do not know the answer to that question, right? But I do know that earlier today, this morning, I went to do an eviction defense that happened over 3 days because there was no water in the building, which is a serious concern, right? But the city had already an existing lawsuit against the property owner since 2018. And when they found out, they claimed that a tenant called 311, which ATU has called 311 multiple times. We have even had tenants do it at the same time just to get the city's attention. And even then, sometimes it takes weeks, if not months, if they even ever send an inspector to look at the conditions. But for whatever reason, they got that call on Thursday, they sent a city inspector on Friday, and right away, since they confirmed that there was no water, they filed an emergency to vacate, order to vacate with a judge on Monday, which then was approved for them to leave by today at 9:30 in the morning because there was no water. Which, by the way, the water was shut down by the city because there was bursted pipes in the building that couldn't, like the landlord needed access to repair and more time to repair. And so when we talk about the sector of the Department of Public Health, because the reason why the order was approved was because it was hazardous, it was not safe for the families to be there in the building. All of a sudden, it was very fast and very clear how they were using their power to get this building vacated, which ultimately was their goal since 2018. And they used this reason to then get all of those families to get evicted or to get them to vacate the premises, right? Because they're not even calling it an eviction. It wasn't the sheriff that came, it was CPD that came to kind of make sure that everybody will leave. And so like, that's the same question, right? Like when does it become a public issue? It is always to how the government thinks something should be an issue or not, who gets to make those decisions. And ultimately, it's kind of the comment that was done earlier, right? Like these systems were not created to work efficiently for us. They work for a neoliberal capitalist agenda. We need to call out what happened between the Ukrainian migrants and the recent arrived migrants from South America, that white supremacy is embedded in our immigration system. And until we call out things like that for what they are, we are stuck in just kind of thinking that, well, if we just put the right people in place, if we just kind of reform the system. No, the system needs to be abolished because it's a system that does not work for many of us. It does not work for the crisis that we're dealing with.
And maybe to add a little bit more about from what I've heard or what I know about the shelter situation, like I guess from my knowledge, there's almost little to zero oversight of health situations, like in public health within the shelters. And they have something like a public health plan where when migrants arrive at landing zones, for example, and landing zone is like an area in Chicago where migrants are sent to, where there's like supposed to be an intake center and that's where they get sent to shelters and such. But at this landing zone, right, that's supposed to be where people are getting vaccinations. That's supposed to be where people are getting, care or being screened for disabilities and other things so that they can be placed in different shelters based on their needs, right? But in the rollout of that, we don't always see that happening. And for example, like looking at the different shelters, we see outbreaks of so many different diseases. We see outbreaks of varicella, we see outbreaks of chickenpox, of the flu, and all of these upper respiratory diseases because a lot of the shelters are overpopulated. On top of that, people are sleeping right next to each other. And the Halsted shelter, for example, there was no isolation unit, like no isolation room. right? So if someone from Halsted, for example, gets sick, they just get sent to another shelter, right? But how do we know someone from Halsted is sick, right? They're either reporting it themselves, saying they have symptoms, there's no oversight of that, or no checkups on people, no check-ins. I'm not sure about all of the other shelters, but Halsted, it's just one example. Like when folks get sick, you only know once they test positive for COVID, once they test positive for something, right? But they have to take that test first, and once they take that test, they're sent somewhere else. But I mean, Halsted is a shelter of 2,500 people, and there's no isolation space for people. They just get sent somewhere else instead, and so that's one of the problems. There's no oversight, and after what happened with John Carlos Martinez, right? The government was kind of like, okay, like we implemented some changes in Halsted. Those changes were smoke detector, hand sanitizer stations, and stuff like that. First of all, why was that stuff not there in the first place? And then on top of that, right, like, so there's very little oversight. And kind of going back to the favorite staffing part of the situation, like from what I've seen from some of the contracts and from some of the reports about favorite staffing, a lot of the shelters have a disproportionate number of security staff that are paid to just be security, like doing curfews and stuff like that, right? But they don't, like there's 0 janitorial staff, 1 or 2 medical staff. When we have shelters this big with so many people, you'd think that instead of the security staff, we'd invest in something like medical staff or something like case management. And those reports, albeit were from October, November, they may have changed at this point. But from my knowledge, a lot of money for staffing is invested into security and policing of migrants to do things like these incident reports instead of invested into care.
Well, I think we need to wrap up for tonight at this point, but I want to say thank you to everybody on the panel for being here. It's been so much helpful information. As we wrap up, I want to make sure that everybody on the panel also has a chance to.
Sorry. Just a quick note from Sabina in the chat, who works for SHIPA, healthcare. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Anyway, really quick, there are medical teams contracted with the city to provide medical care in the shelters. They are the same teams that started providing shelter-based care during the pandemic to all shelters citywide. However, it's not nearly enough since it was barely enough to cover the existing shelters before the migrants started arriving. There's not enough funding or staff to meet the need.
Thank you, Sabina. Okay, so I just want to make sure as we're wrapping up that everybody on the panel has a chance to say what are some action items that you would love for people if they are interested, motivated, what can people do to help out? So maybe let's start on the end with Antonio.
We're always looking for bilingual volunteers to support with the TPS asylum workshops. You want to learn the process. Again, the attorneys kind of give you instructions and then the applications get reviewed. So there's no liability for you, right? Or that you're going to do something wrong and impact somebody negatively. We're always looking for more organizers, individuals that live in the Albany Park area, specifically for ATU. But anybody that wants to start your own like group, mutual aid fund, feel free to connect with us. We have a lot of resources. We're doing a lot of trainings for individuals on the ground, and we're definitely welcome more people that want to activate their own communities. Yeah, and at the end of the day, like we need to make housing as a human right, and it might sound like an impossible slogan, but I think if there's an opportunity to make that happen and to make it into a reality, it's right now.
Yeah, definitely get involved, and if you have a chance, I would definitely encourage you to check out Borderless and our reporting. I mean, we're talking about these issues. We're talking to people on the ground, hearing from their experiences, and I think one of the best ways to get involved is to be informed, about what's going on, and we try our best to do that. Definitely subscribe to our newsletter. It comes out twice a week, and that's where we do a rundown of not only what's going on with migrants in Chicago and nationwide, but just all of our updates about all of our reporting. And we also put out mutual aid resources and links to resource guides where we list, different resources where you can get free food in Chicago or how you can contribute to different mutual aid funds in the city. So definitely checking out some of the resource guides that we've made and also some of our reporting and just staying in touch with that.
And I believe Borderless is set up on the table in the back of the room if you want to sign up for anything.
From the frame of transparency, we wanted to be able to share all the information that we were receiving after asking various people, 6 or 7 times. So if you go to welcometochicago.org, we're putting all of what we find on there so that y'all can know what we know. Because that helps people ask informed questions. So hope you check that out. And I would also say, like, for city council to pass things, you need 26 votes. And that often means that you either don't pass something or it gets watered down if you don't have 26 votes that can hold strong to what you want to pass. And so unfortunately, the way that our electoral politics are set up is that we have a representative, and the representative does what is in their interest and what is in our interest. And so it takes the work of the people holding them accountable constantly to actually make that happen. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks everybody for being here. That's step one, right? Join Total para Todos. You are all welcome. Come see me. I'll add you to the WhatsApp group. We have a rent relief emergency fundraiser happening right now. I need to raise like $4,000 before the end of the night. So you can help me push that out to your friends. That would be terrific. Connect with us on Instagram. We're Total para Todos 35. Please join us. Join us.
And for the Just Cause for Eviction campaign, we did have a sign-in sheet as you came in. So if you didn't get to fill that out, that'd be great. We do have a spot on there you can check if you want to get more involved. We try to do these meetings monthly, and we definitely need more help just with little things like sending food and signing people in. So if that's all you can offer, that's really great, but we're also just trying to build a bigger community. There's also nice little cards that the Public Housing Museum made that are by the front door about our campaign. They're just really lovely. So this has been such an informative and special evening. Truly, thank you all for being here. Thank you everybody for showing up online and in person. These issues continue. We have so much work to do as always, but we are doing that work every day. And thank you to everybody here who's doing it wherever you're doing it.
Thank you all.
And please eat more food. There's also king cake, I guess.
Yeah, and I think we're connected via email with Amy, because I don't have my cards.
Beautiful.
Yeah, we should.
Beautiful. We are also trying to do legal clinics through the committee, so we want to figure out how to best streamline that.
Yeah, that'll be good. How's it going with PRP?
Yo. When I say they don't share shit,